In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the pen tool to make a perfect curve around this shape of a SanDisk hieroglyph. It's very hard to understand how vector-based path works in Photoshop, and it's very hard to learn how to adjust all these curves, so I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible in this tutorial. So let's just hit the pen tool, which makes our path for our final brush stroke around this circle, and I'm going to set down the first anchor point. I like to set my anchor points in areas where I know that the transition in between the beginning and the end of the curve will be deleted if it's possible, obviously. So this damage will be very useful for me right here. This is my third anchor point. As you can see, I just hit the screen with my pen, and then it set my first anchor point right where the outline of my SanDisk will be. And then as I start hitting the screen around the edges of the SanDisk, you can see that Photoshop connects my anchor points with straight lines, which is fine for now. We'll deal with adjusting the shape of these lines later. So I try to use as few points as possible, not to overcomplicate my drawing. And as you can see, I'm not going to close the gap in between the first and this last anchor point, because then Photoshop closes this path and it becomes an object, a closed shape, and it's much harder to adjust and deal with later on. So once I'm satisfied with my initial shape, I'm going to start adding extra anchor points on these lines to be able to modify them. I try to even out the distance in between the two anchor points, and then put my first extra anchor point in the center of this straight line. And then as you can see, when I hover over this dot, it can be deleted just by clicking on the screen, and can be added again, and more than one can be added. So you can add as much as possible, but obviously at this point only one is needed for our demonstration here. So to be able to modify this straight line, we have to push and hold down the Command key on the Mac, and as you can see, my cursor becomes an arrow. So that means that you are ready to move this line, and as I move it up and down, you can see that it's quite flexible, so it can be actually moved all the way to the edges of the shape of this SanDisk, and I try to kind of even it out and make it as close as possible to the original curve. It's not a problem if it's not a perfect match, because these little handle dots at the end of this handlebar are for actually modifying the curves around the edges, and as you can see, by moving them up and down, you can make it more or less dramatic, and you can change the angle and make the curves flatter, or or add more curvature to it. So I'm going to move these handles just as much as it's necessary for this curvature here, and once I'm satisfied with the curve, I'm going to release the command button and hit the screen right here and add the next anchor point, and just repeat the exact same method again and again by adding more and more sections to this curve. This is quite dramatic here, so I'm going to have to add a bit more to the curve, and this is very good. So I'm moving on to the last one, and just add a bit more again here and there, And you can actually go back to any anchor points and add additional curvature to them to make it an exact match to the shape you're about to use the brush over. So this is very good right now. All I have to do is hit right click or secondary click on the Mac and say stroke path, and as you can see, you can actually stroke this path with many tools, but obviously we are going to use the brush tool here. And make sure that your brush line weight is set to the desired line weight, because at this point it's going to stroke your path with that preset brush stroke line weight. So let's just hit OK, and as you can see, this is perfectly stroked over by the brush, and you can see that your path is in the center of the brush stroke. So that has to be kept in mind, obviously, to calculate where your final brush stroke will be. All you have to do is hit right click again and say delete path. So now you get your nice little brush stroke right here, and just hit the eraser and erase the parts that are not needed because covered by damage. As you can see, this line drawing is a very close fit to where the line should be, and if you look at it without damage, you can actually see how smooth and nicely done it is.